I'm going to swap the carburetor on my race bike. This is the original engine that I ran from the start. It's just a mildly modified Predator Hemi 212. I ran a Walboro or Kean style PZ19 carburetor on it for many years without much issue, other than I know I was giving up power on the mid to top end because of its smaller size. So I tried running this PZ26 this year, and I've been having issues with the float sticking on it. Appears to be nothing wrong with it. The level's set right. It just hangs up for some reason. So it's just a cheap knockoff carburetor. I think it might have been $25. So I think it's time to put something else on there that's a lot more reliable. This is the carb that I'm switching to. It's a Mikuni Flatslide 24mm. It's a model TM24. I ran this on my other bike with the 236 and I've had very good results. Got it from NR Racing. I got their air filter adapter, air filter, and then float needle. This is the 2.0 float needle. They come with a 2.5. I need to run this because I run a fuel pump, pulse fuel pump on my setup because of my fuel tank orientation. Bought stuff from NR in the past and they've been very good to deal with, and this is actually the second carburetor I bought from them because everybody else has been sold out of this carburetor. They offer it in a kit that comes with a intake manifold too and a couple other things, but it's just a straight intake, and so it doesn't really work with what I want. I need that angle for the clearance. So I'm going to try and modify the intake manifold that's on that bike right now, or worst case, I'll just have to build a whole new one. Just going to temporarily put the air filter adapter on it and the air cleaner so that I can kind of test fit everything. After looking at it for a while, I decided I'm going to build a new intake. I forgot that I had built this for a non-Hemi head, so the transition wasn't that great between the flange and the cylinder head. Got this flange from NR Racing, matches the Hemi port very nicely. Then a piece of 1 1/8" outside diameter tubing that I'm going to use to build my intake. It's something basically like that. got that piece of tubing cut down to the length that I needed. And I cut another piece that'll slide over the end. That'll make the outside diameter match up to the spigot on the carburetor. I welded that sleeve over the end where the carburetor mounts on, and then squared up the end that butts up against the carburetor. Alright, so here I got everything: carburetor, intake manifold, the coupler, boot, all pushed together tight. I'm just marking the orientation of the intake tube into the flange. So now that I have some reference marks, I'll put a tack weld on it and then double check my fitment again before I finish weld it. So I've got just one single tack weld on the tube to the flange, just checking fitment, and I got it about as tight as I can be to the frame. I have like really nice leg clearance. So I'm going to go ahead and finish welding this on. So I have the flange completely welded on, bolted it back onto the engine. I marked where I'm going to weld on the fitting for the pulse pump. So I just got to drill a hole for that and then weld that fitting on. So the intake manifold all done, fully welded. Gasket surfaces are trued. So it's going to put some paint on it so it doesn't rust and move on from there. It's the intake manifold after a coat of paint. So I'm going to change the float needle to this carburetor. The one that's in it is a 2.5 millimeter. The one that I'm putting in it is a 2.0 millimeter. So I'm doing that because I'm not using a gravity feed fuel system. I'm actually using a fuel pump or a pulse pump. It's actually just a vacuum operated fuel pump that runs off a pulse from the intake manifold. So I tried running one of these carburetors with the 2.5 needle in it, and it would just constantly overflow the float bowl. Just pulling the slide out of it for now because it's going to have to be out when I do the throttle cable anyway, and it'll make it a little easier to work on the carburetor because I have this flat surface to set it on. So I can just pull these tubes off for now. Get those out of the way. So I'm removing the screw that holds that lock plate on that holds the needle valve in. See the difference in size of the hole. I don't know that the needle is different. I don't believe it is. But I'm just going to keep them matched just in case. Using just a little bit of air tool oil on this O-ring, help it slide in easier. Go ahead and drop the needle in, install the lock plate. I had already pulled the jets out to look at those to see what size they are to start with. It has a number 15 pilot jet and a number 130 main in it to start. Float on. Just double checking the float height. If you hold it, if you look at it from the side, it should be pretty much level. Just go ahead and reinstall the bowl and move on from here. This is the bowl drain plug, just making sure that's tight. This is your idle speed screw. This is your idle mixture screw. Choke. Fuel inlet. And these are just vents. Got the 90-degree barb fitting installed and reconnected the hose that goes down to the fuel pump. So once again, that's what sends the pulse signal to the pump. Got the coupler attached to the carburetor. Then I got the air cleaner adapter also attached on there. Just screw clamps. Slide this on until it butts up against the intake. Fuel line installed, vent lines are routed, attached the throttle cable. I'm going to have to do some work on that because I'm not getting full throttle with it. The wire inside the cable is too long, so I need to shorten that. So this shows, this is how much slack I have in the cable. So basically it's how too long the cable is. So I have to remove about a ½ inch from it. So I used a marker. I made a mark on the cable where I'm going to cut it. So I'm going to be cutting this end off that goes into the thumb throttle. So to replace it, I have this brass fitting. It's a Motion Pro part. Get from your local Motion Pro dealer. If you look at the fitting, there's one side that doesn't have any kind of taper. And there's another side that's kind of like countersunk. Pay attention to that. These are actual cable cutters for bicycle repair. Give a nice clean cut. So the taper end is going to be out, so the non-tapered end is where you'll be putting the cable into. It seems kind of backwards, but what you're going to do is the very end of the cable, you're going to fray it out. So what happens is, not only does it keep your fitting from falling off the end, but it's gonna trap the solder inside of there, so it'll almost be like a wedge. So even if you lose your connection between the solder and the fitting and the wire, there'll still be that wedge of solder that's lodged in the wires, if that makes sense. So it's something like that. So then the solder will be trapped in between the wires and it forms like a wedge so that it shouldn't be able to slide out of the brass fitting. So you need to clean the cable. Use this Stay Clean flux. It's like a plumbing flux or soldering flux. And this is like acid basically, and it'll clean any oils or anything like that from the wires and help the solder to stick to it better. So you don't want to leave it in there too long because it'll almost wick it up the wires. You'll end up getting solder up too high. So it's kind of just a quick dunk thing. I'll have a piece of paper towel to absorb the extra. So that's really all you need. So this is a solder pot. Got this from eBay a few years ago. I want to say it was maybe 20 bucks. But basically what it does is just, it's literally a little pot, heats up electrically to melt solder in. I just use some silver solder, like plumbing solder, stuff that's not rosin core. So it's all liquefied. Just gonna dab this thing in there for a second or two. It's kind of the same deal as the flux where I don't want it to wick up the wire. Pretty good coverage there. It's okay that there's actually a little too much on the end, so I can just grind that off. There's that new end after I ground the extra off the end. And it's ready to go on the bike. The new end on there took up all that extra slack. So this is first start. Everything's dry, so it's going to take a bunch of cranks to get it going. So I'm just going to give it a little shot of brake cleaner, kind of cheat. So it's hesitating from hitting the throttle. Tell me it's probably lean, so I'm going to try lifting the needle up a notch. So this is the jet needle. This is where I'm going to make my adjustment. So I want to lift the needle to make it draw more fuel, so I'll actually be lowering the clip one notch.